Hi, I'm Reid.
And I'm Daniel.
And welcome to Nordic Notes. And today we're going to be talking about AI in the legal space, both how AI is changing the nature of law firms and the work that lawyers do, and also the law governing AI itself here in the European Union.
And today with us we have Cecilia Malmberg Flodén from Hansen, the law firm here in Stockholm, who's focusing on tech and tech companies. But you also have a background from companies like the Nasdaq and a legal counsel at a startup and growth company here in Stockholm. We're super excited to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited as well.
So if you want to start off, just give us the background about yourself and Hansen.
Yeah, thank you. I've been with Hansen for 6 years approximately. I'm head of our tech and commercial group, so we focus a lot on commercial contracts, a lot of IT and tech related legal matters, like data privacy, for example, and now, of course, AI. And Hansen as a whole is a transaction-focused law firm where we do traditional M&A, but also venture capital financing and related matters. So we're almost 40 people and based in Stockholm.
Fantastic. And I know obviously you've been sort of leading the charge at Hansen to help find new technologies that can help sort of augment your work. So I'd love to hear a little bit about what has stood out to you as usable now. Obviously, we talk a lot about how the inflection point in AI came about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, where suddenly a lot of these tools emerged as very obviously usable for lots of different enterprise use cases. So I'd love to hear about how you've found these tools both experimentally and then in the real world.
Yeah, sure. I mean, almost probably like 10, 12 years ago even, there was talk around town about AI and how it could help lawyers in, for example, due diligence processes. But at that time, there was nothing that was good enough. But as you say, like 1.5 years ago, something happened. And I was kind of an early adopter there, looking at different tools and implemented an AI strategy for us as a firm about 1 year ago, I think. And since then we've been testing, taking a lot of demos, trying out different tools, and some are good, some are not good enough still, but it's exciting, and there's a big market out there for legal tech, definitely. There are a lot of different areas, I think, where lawyers can use AI. One is, of course, for legal research, like tools gathering legislation, case law, statutes, everything like that. And you can so easily, with the help of AI, find information that could take days, weeks to find earlier. And then, of course, document analysis, contract analysis, finding risks, helping you find different clauses that are interesting, and then due diligence, like I mentioned before. There you usually have like tons of documentation. You guys know that for sure from your investments, and in M&A deals, more traditional M&A deals, the document load is just enormous for some companies. I don't think yet that there is a bulletproof tool for doing legal due diligence, but there are definitely options that are getting better and better. We're actually not using that so much just yet, but I've spoken to other law firms that have tried that quite a bit.
And one thing that strikes us when we look at the new AI models, they are very good at natural language processing, which I think has led many companies to focus on the legal space because it's a lot of text, as you say, there's a lot of documentation, and you can obviously read that fairly well and you can search it fairly well. But what would you say from the tools and the processes you tried so far have been the biggest problems or bottlenecks for you to really utilize technology to augment yourself and your colleagues?
Yeah, good question. I think, well, from the beginning, when we started using ChatGPT, for example, there was the fear, of course, of confidentiality and privacy. So whatever you enter into your prompts, you need to make sure that you don't reveal any client information or other kind of sensitive information. So of course we still use ChatGPT, but with care.
Yeah.
But then there are different legal tech providers now that are building more secure systems on top of the large language models, of course. And we use a service called Leia, for example, a Stockholm-based startup that is. It's going very well for them, I think, and we've been a customer user of Leia since October last year, I think, and that's a really, really great tool. And what's you asked about the challenges, and I think they make the AI more conservative compared to ChatGPT, since it is a serious legal tech tool. You don't want it to hallucinate, you don't want it to go crazy. So there sometimes we can experience that it's not as creative.
Yeah.
But then we can
Maybe that's
use
a good
both.
thing.
Exactly, it is, and we can still go back and use ChatGPT as well.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, of course.
And so when you're evaluating these tools, I mean, what's sort of the level of certainty that you have to feel around the tool, or the level of confidence that you have to have in the tool before you feel like you can actually use it on a real customer case or a client that you're working with? Is it sort of, as long as you have smart people, smart lawyers looking at the output and reviewing what the AI tool is doing, then it's fine, you can use it, and obviously you have the human in the loop always? Or is it the case that, you really want to see absolute accuracy, 100% or something very close to that, before you feel comfortable putting it in the hands of your colleagues?
Yeah, exactly. Now, I don't think we are really at that point yet that we can expect 100% accuracy. You will have to check the output. I think it's more like what you described first. Like it can definitely make us more efficient and help us do a lot of tasks in a quicker and more efficient way. But we have to still fact check and be a bit careful.
Yeah, that makes sense. If we believe that, for example, the difference between GPT-5 and GPT-4 is as monumental as the difference between 4 and 3. So the pace of innovation and acceleration of accuracy and the power of these models continues to grow exponentially over the next few years. How do you then see the future law firm? What does that look like in a world where these tools are pushing towards 100% accuracy and are able to do most of, if not the entire job of, for example, a paralegal or somebody who's spending most of their time drafting contracts and writing clauses?
I think that some parts of our business will definitely change a lot. So paralegals, like you mentioned, either there might not be a need for paralegals, or it could be like a super professional AI adopting paralegal that can do the job that they've been doing before in an even better way. So I think if we're smart about it, we can just excel how we work in our output. But yeah, definitely there will be cost savings, and there we can probably also take on larger projects, so it's a scalability thing as well. So like, for example, for Hansen, we're quite a small firm compared to other like top tier firms. And some projects are just too big for us because we don't have the manpower to take them. But with AI, maybe we will be able to in the future.
I think that's super interesting. It's typically when you see technology breakthroughs, it certainly will have cost benefits, but there is also this opportunity of doing more with less. And we talked about that in our last episode as well, which is augmenting, meaning more, augmenting people, in this case, being able to do more work, bigger work, and obviously in the end sort of also have better margins on that work because you can automate certain things. But it seems like we're coming down to that always, this thing where it's sort of, how much can you actually automate? That's one question. I think to augment, certainly, but can you automate things? And there you have this problem with accountability in the end.
Yeah.
While the person who asks for your services, they expect accountability on your side, that you at least checked. You know what clause it found, and you can't just refer to the AI. It's very difficult.
Yeah. And with due diligence, for example, I think we might see a development. You can choose as a client. You can choose whether you want to have an AI due diligence or a human due diligence. And with an AI due diligence, maybe then you would be prepared. You would have to be prepared to not get as much liability from the law firm. We would have to say, like, it's AI that did this risk analysis.
We have to read the terms and conditions when you sign up for that.
But then you might not have to pay as much for the due diligence. But on the other hand, if you want the human version, then you will pay more. And some clients will probably want that for quite a long time to come, I think.
No, for sure. And to some extent, even if these AI tools do end up, outperforming humans in the same kind of task, the AI will never, well, I say never, you never know, but probably it's unlikely that AI or the AI vendors will be legally liable, right, and take that kind of accountability that lawyers themselves have when they're working on a case.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
I think that's something that's very hard to automate.
We also have the last 2% or 1% even, when there is an error, then something is wrong, then you want this insurance policy, as you said, the liability becomes a question.
Yeah.
And we'll see how far that goes when it's sort of, having, I guess the foundation model providers will never, or vendors will never take that responsibility. So it's
probably not.
But potentially legal tech companies could eventually take some of it.
Yeah,
I don't know,
exactly.
Because someone will have to take it. At least with the bigger companies, they will require that.
Yeah. And that's also, talking about legal tech companies, I think that's very interesting, a very interesting part of what will happen to our business or our sector as well, because it opens up for new business opportunities for lawyers to actually start legal tech companies, which also has an effect on access to justice. So for a lot of people out there in the world can't afford legal services at the moment because law firm services are quite expensive. But with legal tech companies emerging within both giving you simple legal advice, but also providing you with documentation or helping you understand the legal process of a court procedure, for example, whatever, that can be really helpful. And so both democratizing law a bit, but also new business opportunities for lawyers.
No, for sure. And I think on this discussion that we're having are sort of around the somewhat risks of implementing AI into this whole process, maybe we should then talk about the law itself governing the use of AI, both in legal purposes, but also in every other industry. And obviously the EU passed earlier this year the AI Act, and it'd be really interesting to get your view on how this impacts companies that are building AI products. Obviously it affects different levels of the technology stack, so to speak, in different ways, right? So those who are leveraging a model obviously have very different requirements to those who are actually building these models. But yeah, I'd love to get your view on how you see this.
Yeah, it's a really interesting piece of legislation. But I can really understand that a lot of companies are a bit pissed off about it, but also worried about what it will mean for them. And there has been a lot of talk about it slowing down innovation and what happens when the EU have this legislation and the US don't and China doesn't, and etc. I think it's important for all companies in this space to actually sit down and think about how will this act potentially affect me, and kind of map out what use cases do I have in my business that might be subject to this legislation. It might not be so bad, but if you are, for example, fine-tuning and building upon a large language model, I think it's a good thing to be proactive and think it through, because it will there are quite big sanctions in this law. It's built a little bit like the GDPR in that way. And you will kind of risk being scrutinized by authorities and also your customers. They will ask questions and you will need to be able to answer them. I actually, this week, it was the first time a client of mine sent me a contract where their customer had added clauses that referred to the AI Act and that required them to warrant different things and to state that they were going to build their product in accordance with the AI Act, etc.
Interesting. And sort of we've been on this topic. I guess it's sort of a hobby of ours to understand this a bit more, because it is still a bit wishy-washy.
It's unclear.
It's unclear, definitely.
But what would you say what's the state of it right now, as it is right now? I mean, there has been a lot of events, there have been discussions, there have been some consensus and some countries that were not super happy about it. And where do we stand now with this legislation?
So you guys at least have probably heard about this trilogue, the process in the EU, and we're waiting for the very final version of the act to be published, and that's going to happen probably any day now. They've said April, May, but it has been decided, so it will enter into force, but we haven't seen the exact final text. However, I believe that the version we saw that has leaked out is probably like 98% what we will see in the final text. What we haven't seen, for example, are the different translations. So there's no Swedish version yet, for example. But then after that, just same as with the GDPR again, some things will not be 100% clear, even when the final text is out. Because they want the courts and the authorities to interpret the law. So some parts are a bit unclear and will be for some time.
And I think, of course, referring to GDPR, we've seen this before, right?
Yeah.
That when the EU has a very sort of broad vision for how they see regulating, particularly a quite technical problem.
Exactly.
They do sort of put a relatively vague list of priorities together, right, and then kind of turn it over to the member states, right, and their individual enforcement agencies to figure out how to actually enforce this law. And I think one of the interesting things we've seen with GDPR is especially at I think sort of smaller businesses or startups, they don't feel the same pressure to comply as larger companies because they're not as under the microscope. They're not being investigated or prosecuted for it.
Exactly.
And of course, you only really care about legislation when you think it might actually affect you.
Yeah, exactly.
And that doesn't just mean that it says it will. It means that the regulators or the enforcers are actually out there, finding people. So, curious to see how this plays out.
Exactly, and this is actually a good thing with the AI Act because they have carved out SMEs and startups. So all the requirements don't even apply to these kind of companies. So you will be able to keep experimenting a little bit and building your companies without having this totally heavy burden of compliance on you. There is also this sandbox initiative, if you're familiar with that. So they will let companies together with authorities try out different models, different ways of working, and see if that is in line with the legislation or not.
And of course, new models or I guess substantially fine-tuned models as well will have to be evaluated, and then those evaluations sent to some kind of, I guess, as yet to be defined agency of the EU, or I think maybe there is an agency that's been set up but hasn't quite started doing this process yet. But do we have any sense of how that will go, or how hard it will be for the EU to actually start approving these types of changes to models? Because it's all so new and hard to really grasp at the moment.
Yeah, $1 million question, I think. I don't have a good answer to that at the moment. But I mean, they in the EU, they are aware that it's not good for Europe and for the European companies to like just totally kill innovation.
Yeah.
So my my feeling is that they have had that in mind when working with this legislation. So I hope that they will be pragmatic in some sense at least. And
I think this the dilemma, as we mentioned, like many countries and like the US and others are taking the sort of regulate later approach, and the Europe is taking the regulate now approach, where I think the innovator problem lies more in the fact that it's not clear. So, I mean, the EU, the whole notion or the whole idea about regulating like this is that it should be clear. Like you can then build because it's clear what the regulatory environment looks like, but it's actually not. So you can build all you want, but all of a sudden it might sort of notice that this agency in the EU is like super strict on this part that you are actually building for, and this will sort of play out in the future. But it does give a lot of uncertainty, I think, for companies. I mean, from how should startups? You said they were carved out to some extent. How should they think about this, or what's your view? You're obviously meeting a lot of young companies.
So the level of risk is determined by looking at the probability of harm and also the severity of that harm. So that's kind of a mantra you can have in the back of your head. And so if
that is the pragmatic approach, more or less, as you said.
Yeah.
Although maybe to briefly play devil's advocate, I mean, these are also quite subjective concepts, right? I mean, harm to one person or one company might mean something completely different to another person or another company. So I'm also very curious to know how they define that and what they see as potentially harmful AI systems.
Yeah.
I guess we don't really know yet.
We don't really know, but it has a lot to do with the fundamental rights of individuals, the potential harm to society, environment. Like systemic risk is something that a lot circles around in the introduction to the act. And with this risk-based approach that I just mentioned, you have some banned AI that is just not allowed at all. That can be, for example, social credit scores and some kind of
like defense applications.
Yeah,
I guess.
But there are some exceptions in that area.
I think those were carved out. Actually,
it's true. That's true. But they are regulated very heavily anyway. There are other regulations.
Yeah, there are other regulations for that, exactly. But also like techniques that manipulate individual behavior and things like that. That's like just a big no-go. But then
so
and
fake
then there's
news, this sort of Cambridge Analytica type of operation that's sort of preemptively banned. Which makes sense, by the way. Hard to argue against that.
If you have a chatbot, for example, it will need to be very clear to the individual using the chatbot that it is an AI they're communicating with, and you need to be able to. The output needs to be clear that it's AI produced, but then it might not be that much more than that. So I don't think startups should be too worried, but I mean it's important to get some understanding, especially depending on which area you're in.
You should know which risk zone you're in, pretty much.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a good start.
And I guess it is somewhat defined by, both industry and also what level in the tech stack you are. Because I think there are companies like Mistral, for example, in France and other, European LLM developers, vendors, who will have fairly stringent requirements that they have to comply with now. And I remember when we looked at the passage of the AI Act, it was both France and Germany who were fairly opposed to some of these harsher rules around certification of new models, because of course they're the ones who have these model vendors. In Berlin and in Paris. But I do think it's interesting, to look into how that will affect their ability to compete with OpenAI. And yesterday we saw Meta come out with their new model as well. So obviously,
3.
right. So the Americans moving very, very quickly. Does this sort of put the brakes on model vendors in Europe and make it a lot harder for them to compete with their American counterparts?
Yeah, it's too early to say, I think, but definitely there's a a general worry that that will be the case.
And I guess on the flip side, perhaps you could argue that those vendors, by being regulated, might have a more safe product at the end. I mean, I've used this example in previous episodes, but Airbus versus Boeing, right? Boeing can innovate quickly and take things to market, perhaps without very deep regulatory oversight, which means that, yes, you know, for example, 747 came out 30, 40, 50 years before the A380, but still today people feel safer flying on an Airbus than they do on a Boeing plane. And perhaps that's the direction that this market will go. But very hard to say, of course.
It is very hard to say.
Yeah, definitely. I think they are also have the exposure for the training data issue, which has been also litigated in the US or is being litigated in the US. I think all of the vendors are pretty much sued by someone. And I think they have that sort of regulatory burden as well. Whereas some companies will sort of use that model, which is already trained on a data set and so on.
And most probably there will be legislation in the US as well, for example. I don't see a future where it's totally unregulated.
No.
Well, we saw already the White House signed an executive order, which requires all these agencies in the federal government to look into where they see risks around AI in their particular department, and then how that will sort of eventually inform a piece of legislation. But I guess it also to some extent speaks to how America and Europe approach regulation, right? Where Europe is much more on the front foot, like this is how we want the world to look, and we're going to create a regulatory matrix that reflects our vision for the world. Whereas the US is very much sort of, let's see how the entrepreneurs and investors and the market in general wants the world to look, and then we'll sort of fill in the gaps. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for watching, everybody. Really appreciate you tuning in. Don't forget to like the video and share it with your friends. Comment down below on LinkedIn or on YouTube if you have any thoughts on this. And don't forget to subscribe for more videos from Nordic Notes.